Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Songwriting Simplified with me, Jonny Lipsham. Tonight, I'm on my own, so this will be just me, no guests. But hopefully next week we will have another special guest. I don't know who that's going to be just yet. I have yet to find out. But yeah, I would like to start having a series of regular guests, and we might, over the course of time, have maybe the same few different guests appearing at different times, and we'll all talk about different subjects and different topics and things like that. So if you guys are up for different guests, then we will have different guests. I like doing shows on my own, but I also like doing shows with other people. Last week we had the very, very awesome Rich Cresswell with us, talking about composing with sound libraries and things like that, which is very, very cool. And it was great fun. He is a lot of fun to talk to, and he's extremely knowledgeable about using sound libraries, being that that's kind of what he does for a living. So it was very, very cool. So I hope everybody is doing well. I am doing pretty good, actually. It's been quite a long day. And kind of like largely inactive until like maybe the last 35 minutes of my day have been absolutely frenetic. I wasn't really sure whether I was actually going to be here to start the show on time. But we made it. We made it. Sorry, I was just something I had to take care of right there. But we're doing pretty well. My family are doing really well, but it's just a busy time at home at the moment. So yeah, so let's go see who is here. And we have a question already. In fact, we have two already. But if you want to get your questions into the chat, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and hit the notification bell. That's the first two tasks. And then you will have to wait 10 minutes, and then eventually after 10 minutes the chat will become available to you, and then you can ask your question. And the best way to do that is to type at Jonny Lipsham Studios. That makes my name show up in red for me. You don't get to see that, but for me it shows up red, and then that helps me pick out your questions from just among the general conversation that's going on in the chat, which I really I'm very cool about you doing. So please don't stop chatting. Keep going. That's all very cool and everything else. I like that. But yeah, if you want to ask a question, type my name in first and then ask your question, and then I can pick your question out from the chat, and it will just keep things rolling. Last week was superb. You guys asked some great questions, and then on Sunday night we had a fantastic show on Sunday. You guys asked some absolute belting questions. So if you can top those two shows in terms of questions, then go for it. Absolutely. I like to be tested by you guys with some good quality questions. All right, so let's get to it. So we have Dave from Bops NY who is here, and he asked the first question. And we also have, who else do we have? We have John Hawk, we have John Edgar, we have Kyle Draduziak, we have Paul Morgan. We have the W5 family, who are a fantastic tribe of people. They are awesome. And we have Don Oliver as well, and Bobby Booth, who is one of my longest standing supporters. I'm ever grateful for his presence on here. And we have Papa Raptor Music as well. We have Ronald Figura. And I've already mentioned John Edgar, who has the other question. And we have a fantastic demonstration of how to ask a question from my good friend Rich at Studio One Toots, where he has put my name in, and he just says, just like that. Exactly right. That's exactly how you do it. And Sean White Jr. is here, and George Mateos is also here. So we have a good crew of people here tonight, which is fantastic. All right, so questions. Let's get to your questions. So, because it's Songwriting Simplified, we're talking about songwriting and making it simple and explaining complicated things in an easy to understand way. That's kind of what this show is all about. For those of you that are completely unfamiliar with what I do here, that's what we talk about. So we talk songwriting, composing, arranging. So even if you're not a songwriter or a composer, but you like to do arrangements of other people's music, we can talk about that too. We also we also talk about music theory. Speaking of which, there is a question on music theory from John Edgar. So we will get to that in a wee while. He asks a little bit of a slightly technical question, which you may not necessarily find in popular music, but you certainly do find this in classical composition. So we will take a look at that. I'm going to have to, whilst I'm answering Dave's question, going to have to be also racking my brain to remember how Neapolitan chords work, because it's been a long time since I have done any of that stuff. But yes, it is cool. And it's a very, very useful function. And actually, you can use it in popular music. And it does get used in popular music, in, pop songs, film scores. It gets used in a fair amount as well. So it is something that is handy. It's a handy little harmonic tool to have in your toolkit that you can use and make good use of. All right, so let's get to it. So Dave's question is, he says, I used to do this for years, and he says, he's talking about stacking fifths. Hang on, I need to unpin that message. There we go. He says, I used to do this for years and found out it's called stacking fifths. Perhaps given time, you can show the gang. All right, so stacking fifths. Stacking any interval actually is a handy little device, and it's a great way to build chords in a situation where you don't have a particular tonal center, maybe. And what we're talking about is we're talking about stacking intervals, notes of a certain interval's distance, one on top of the other. So you can stack fifths, but it's probably stacking fourths that is much more common. Because, stacking fifths, you go... Sounds like the open tuning of a violin or a cello or something like that. And it does sound quite nice. And it's beautifully wide open. And it is a very useful wide open sound that's very ambiguous. There's no real sense of being in major or minor. So you can use this to generate a sense of mystery. Another one is stacking fourths, and you hear this quite a bit, actually, particularly in the music of maybe the early to middle 1950s, and then into the very early 1960s in the music of Miles Davis and, great arrangers like Gil Evans and people like that. Where harmony is built out of stacks of fourths. So, what is the interval of a fourth? We start here with C, so this would be 1. Count up 4 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Count up 4 from there. Alright, count up another 4. And then another fourth. Another one. And you can keep going. Until you end up back round to C, right there, way up at the top of the piano. Now, stacks of fourths are really cool because you can move these around in a really nice fashion. So I can go... So I'm basically using all the white notes and I'm building harmony out of stacks of fourths and then building a melody on top of that. Again, it's quite tonally ambiguous because it's more modal. And you can debate amongst yourselves whether I was using Dorian mode or Mixolydian mode there. It was probably a mixture of the two, to be honest. But they are really, really useful. And if you want to get funky with them, you can. There's Steely Dan's Green Earrings, which features a lot of this kind of open fourth sounding harmony. So you can get really quite funky with that. And all that's doing really is it's going between a stack of fourths and then a semitone below. So you got this tension here, which then resolves. And then you go down a tone. So that's another way in which you can make use of stacks. So you can stack any interval you like. You can stack fourths, fifths, sixths. There are points in which there are what you would call diminishing returns, where the harmony doesn't really work terribly well. But certainly fourths and fifths sound great. Thirds also sound nice. So thirds is nice, whether they are stacking major thirds or stacking minor thirds. Those are also really cool. So there you go. That is a good question. See if we've got anything else. Ronald Figura is saying Neapolitan 6 sounds like an interesting subject. Yes, we're going to get onto that. In fact, we're going to get onto that right now. So John says, discuss the place of the Neapolitan 6 in harmonic music composition practices. That's a roundabout way, and I love the way John expresses himself. It's very clear, very concise, very particular, and I like it. But essentially what he's asking is, how does this particular chord function? And quite often it resolves, because it's I'll explain kind of what it is in just a second, but it resolves to chord 5. Now, the Neapolitan 6th is a weird little chord. It's a chromatic chord, and it's built on the flat 2 of a key. So, if we're in the key of C, then it's going to be a D flat chord. And it's, generally speaking, a D flat major chord. And usually it's in its first inversion. So what does that mean? So, if here's the root inversion, with the D flat at the bottom. The first inversion, you take the bottom note and you put it on the top. So let's take the D flat off the bottom and put it at the top. So we've got F, A flat, D flat. Alright, so if we're in the key of C, so where we got this chord 5 here, going chord 5 to chord 1, this is where you can slip in this nice little D flat chord. And you get this quite a bit in cadences at the very end of a piece. You want to celebrate the end of the piece, you know, so you go. And there's my Neapolitan 6 chord, the flat 2 chord, to chord 5 to chord 1. So You also get this at the end of the theme tune to Murder, She Wrote, by the way. Obscure factoid for the week. There you go. At the very end of it, you get this. So it's really useful as a little chromatic passing chord going into chord 5. So you can make use of this as a way of ending a piece of music to give it that real sense of finality, or as a passing into a chord 5 going to a new key, perhaps. So let's say we're in C major and we're going to go to E flat major. So you would do 5 to 1 in E flat. So you go. So that would be B flat going to E flat. So but let's say before we get to this 5, we want to do that little. So in the key of C, we know that it's D flat. But our target key is E flat. So that's going to be an E chord with the 3rd in the bass. So you can use it as a substitute for chord 2. And it does sound a little bit colourful. You know, particularly if you're here, if you're in A and you go into E flat. See how that works? So I'm using this Neapolitan chord as a substitute. It's taking the place of the chord 2 in a 2-5-1. So instead of going F minor, B flat 7, E flat, I'm going E with G sharp in the bass, B flat 7, E flat. So I could go from the key of A major. Just like that, and that would sound just fine. That's just doing a normal 2-5-1. But why don't we swap out the F minor for this Neapolitan chord, this E over G sharp, instead? This time we'll go to the key of C major. And it works really, really effectively. It provides because it's a chromatic chord, it doesn't belong to the key that you're in. What it does is it provides a different color that your listener is not necessarily expecting. Your listener may be expecting a standard 2-5-1. But why don't you just change it up? And provide that completely different, unexpected Neapolitan chord going into the 5, into the 1. And so you could use that as, let's say, in your song, you're going to do that classic key change where your last chorus is up a whole step or up a half step. So you're going to D flat major from C. So you're in C. This is your verse and you're about to hit your final chorus. Now, what you would traditionally do is something like, and you're in your D flat. You've just gone 5-1. So from C, go for the last chorus. You could just do that 5, but why not stick that lovely little chord in front of it? All right, so we need to work out what that is in the key of D flat. Now, we know in the key of C that it's D flat. So in the key of D flat, that's going to be a D. This is going to be D with the F sharp in the bass. So let's go back to our nice little kind of verse thingy in C. And all of a sudden you've got something that just sounds a little bit more interesting than just a regular 2-5-1. So that is what is called the Neapolitan sixth. It's based out of an Italian classical convention, Italian classical harmonic convention that kind of develops in the early period of what you'd call the Mozartian period during the classical period. So you're talking, the 1760s, it became a thing that that composers started to do by way of preceding a 5-1 resolution. And it was very popular with Italian composers. And eventually Austrian and German composers like Mozart, and then after him Beethoven, picked up this idea and they started using it, and then they kind of started developing all sorts of other concepts based around it, which is very cool to get into if you're interested. So I hope that was helpful, because it's an interesting one. On the Neapolitan transition, can you trigger it by a leading bass line or other low instrument? Yes, you can walk up to it, for sure. You can, if you're in that C major business. Could, you could do that. You could walk the bass line up to it chromatically. So that's actually quite nice, actually, Dave. I like that. So going C over E, C over F, D with the F sharp, A flat 7, D flat. I like that. That's a lovely idea. Works pretty good, I think. Let's see, who else do we have that's just arrived? Secret Squirrel has just arrived, and we're getting a little bit deep into some extra harmonies. Sean White says, Neapolitan 6 gives a little bit more pulling off of the emotions before the resolution. Yeah, definitely. Especially if you're using it as a nice little springboard into your final chorus upper half step. Because you want to make this big and over the top in your final chorus. Certainly a good way to do it. John says, you mentioned cadences. Please demonstrate how a deceptive cadence compares with an authentic cadence. Deceptive ones are, well, there's lots of different types of deception. One is an interrupted cadence, where you might do, hang on, let me rescue my pedal. It's going for a walkabout. There we go. For example, you might do something like, 5, and everybody is anticipating going to 1. Okay, but instead of going to 1, what we're going to do is we're going to go 2, 5, 6. So I'm interrupting my 5 to 1 by going 5 to 6 instead. So that's what you would call an interrupted cadence. Another one would be where you use a tritonal substitution. So instead of going 2, 1, you go 2, flat 2, 1 instead. Or you could use that as another stepping stone to get into a completely different key. So and now I'm in A flat major, and you would never have realized it. But basically what I did there was I went chord 2, D minor, D flat 7, C, and then G over B, D flat minor, and then E flat 7 to A flat. Neapolitan cadence, back to C major. Flat again, Neapolitan, back to C. Let's try that again. A over C sharp, D minor, and D flat 7 again, C, G over B, B flat minor, A7 flat 5, A flat major, D flat over F, G7, C. So those are kind of deceptive little cadences. They're all kind of replacing a little 5-1, 5-1, 5-1, 5-1 sequence. Listen to what the bass is doing. The bass is descending chromatically. Down to that A flat. And then I'm going to end in the minor because it's dark and I want to be dark today. Oh, and my keyboard's distorting? Let's see. Yeah, they are. Good spot. Yeah, my piano was up a little bit too loud. So let's try that again with a little less keyboards. So let's see, is that a better level? Yeah, that's a better level. So let's do the D minor, D flat, C, G over B, B flat, minor, A7 flat 5, A flat major 7, D flat over F, G, C, to the very dark C minor. Yeah, I'm aware of it. It was just the volume was up a little loud. I don't know why it was up so loud. Sorry about that, folks. But we've fixed that. All right, so good questions there on deceptive cadences. So those are deceptive cadences. They're deliberately not obvious, and quite often it's made up of little substitutions. I'm replacing a 5 to a 1 with another 5 to another 1. So in this case, there's chord 2. We looked at this flat 2 thing already, but in the case of the Neapolitan cadence. But instead of going to 5, I'm going 2, flat 2. Now why am I going flat 2? Well, it's because it's a tritone away from the G. So G, so count up, G, tone, tone, 3 tones. Tritones, 3 whole tones. So if I play a G and an F and a B, that's the skeleton for a G7 chord, which resolves like this. Okay, we've talked about tritonal substitutions before, but in case you've not been around, a G, F and B, that's a skeleton for a G7 chord. And they resolve that way. Now, a D flat 7 chord has these same 2 notes at the top. There's the 3 and the 7 on the root. There's the root. There's the 7. There's the 3. Those 2 notes are exactly the same, which is why you can do that. And it works in exactly the same way. Alright, so I'm going D minor, D flat 7, C, and then G over B is a little kind of passing chord, B flat minor, and then tritone sub, A7, which is substituting for. There's another tritone, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Those have the same function. And then Neapolitan that we talked about earlier, 5, 1. 2, flat 2, 1, 7, flat 7, and then a substitute 5 going into 1 in A flat, and then Neapolitan 5, 1. So it's all fun, and the cool thing about all of those things is that all of those have great voice leading, where the different notes move, the different notes in the chords move nice and smoothly between one chord and the next one, which is why that works so well. And that's why we call those sometimes deceptive cadences, because the ear doesn't think you've been led to a new key, which is what I'm effectively doing. I'm going from the key of C major to the key of A flat. It's just I'm taking you on a little journey with some really smooth voice leading that gets you to A flat. And your ear is completely deceived and you have no idea that that's what's happened. And then, you know, the Neapolitan helps make that return home to C quite subtle. Let's see what else we have. I saw something today about Ed Sheeran, or however he spells his name, and he said, learn 4 chords if you can play any song he ever wrote, and they're all the same. Yeah, I like Ed. Ed's funny because that's not entirely true. Some of his songs actually have more complex harmony than that. But he's not wrong in that, you know, a 1-6-2-5 progression is extremely common in popular music, you know. A lot of songs have been written just using those chords, and essentially that's kind of what I was doing earlier on. But yes. Let's see. Tritones are good for picking out a next chord. Yeah, they help you lead from one chord to another, definitely. Let's see. John says, thanks for clarification and examples of cadences in Neapolitan 6. Lots of cool modulations to get back or away from the tonic. Definitely. You can, using that Neapolitan chord as a passing into a chord 5 can take you anywhere. And tritone or flat 5 substitutions are so smooth that they can lead you from any key to any other key, and your listener will be completely deceived. They will have no idea that they've gone from one key to a completely other foreign key. So it is definitely something worth experimenting with. There's a lot of good documentation on the Neapolitan 6. I'm going to point you to one. I'm going to point you to a website called musictheoryacademy.com. And they've got the Neapolitan 6 explained with some written examples, which is well worth checking out. I'm going to put the link in the chat because I'm nice to you folks. And there's a link to their Neapolitan 6 article, and it explains a little bit more about the first inversion flat 2 chord and how it goes from 1, flat 2, 5, and then to 1. And it gives you some examples, like for example, from Beethoven's Piano Sonata Opus 32, and then how you can use it to modulate. And we talked about that tonight as well. Modulating down a semitone using Neapolitan 6 is one example they've got there. And they've got some audio examples, which is very, very cool. So you can actually not only read the music, but you can hear it as well. And then he also talks about tritones as well, which is great. So there's related post-secondary dominant chords, tritones, and augmented 6 chords linked to that article at the bottom if you want to just dive a little bit deeper and widen your harmonic vocabulary. And then you can start trying to figure out where these are on the piano or on the guitar or, you know, any other particular instrument that you use for writing your songs. Cool thing about that is, yes, it does get you away from the, you know, the typical 4-chord song, you know, the 1 2 5, the 1 2 4 5 progression, or 3 6 2 5 or 1 6 2 5. Those fairly standard chord sets of chord changes that are used in a lot of popular songs, and it helps you also spice up those things as well. Spice up your songs by putting in some unexpected chords that people are not going to expect, and provide a little bit of extra color. So, you know, even if your palette is quite plain harmonically, then doing something like dropping in a Neapolitan 6th will provide a bit of extra spice, a bit of extra color that otherwise wouldn't be there in your song. And you'll find, you know, the Beatles and the Eagles and ABBA and other groups from the 1970s whose harmonic palettes are actually quite wide and expansive, making use of things like the Neapolitan 6th and tritonal substitutions as well. So those are well worth checking out. Tony says, what constitutes a hit song these days? Is it the chord changes, lyrics, the arrangement? The Cars had a great song, My Best Friend's Girl, but it only made it to number 34. Well, yeah, here's the thing. What constitutes a hit song has been the subject of, you know, songwriting since songwriting began, really. How do I make a song that millions of people are going to want to hear and are going to either get the sheet music like they did in the 1930s, or, you know, they're going to get the little vinyl single, the little 45 for their record player. Or flash forward to nowadays, how do you get people to just go and smash your SoundCloud or your iTunes or CD Baby or wherever it is you put your music up? How are you going to get people, how are you going to drive traffic to your music and, you know, generate a lot of downloads and a lot of listens. How are you going to do that? So, you know, songwriters through the ages have tried to figure out, is there a formula? Is there a formula, a magic bullet that guarantees that you have all the ingredients that's going to make thousands of people go get your music, go get this particular song? So you have like Stock Aitken and Waterman and other songwriting groups like that, and music production groups like that, who have tried to formularize it and go, okay, we need this ingredient, we need this ingredient, we need this ingredient, we need to have this arrangement idea, we need to have a down chorus before the big final chorus. You know, there's lots of arranging techniques that help. There's lots of mixing things you can do. There's lots of production things you can do that will help. For example, having a almost mono verse and then a wide chorus, a big, fat, wide chorus with more instrumentation, a more spare arrangement for your verses, and then gradually add to your verses. So maybe you have just bass and kick drum and rhythm guitar and the lead vocal for your first verse. And then you go into your chorus, which has the big, expansive sound, full drum set, bass, 3 or 4 guitars, 3 or 4 keyboard instruments, horn section, backing vocals, the works. That's your chorus. And then you go back to that kind of small sound again, but you maybe add another couple of instruments. Like maybe you add a little bit of extra percussion and you put those out wide. So maybe a shaker on one side, a tambourine on the other, just to add a little bit of extra ear candy, and maybe an extra keyboard part that's playing a counter melody to the main melody that the vocal is doing. And then maybe you add a couple of little horn section figures. And then you build back up into the big, fat, wide chorus again. And then you maybe have a guitar solo or a saxophone solo or something like that as an interlude. And then you go to your down chorus. What's a down chorus? It's a basically chorus where everything is stripped away. The vocal is very, very dry, very upfront and present and in your face. And you've maybe just got the vocal and an acoustic guitar and nothing else. And it's super mono. And it's designed to be as if the vocalist is right against your ear, whispering the song into your ear. And you maybe have the first half of the chorus that's down like that. And then boom, you go back out wide again. Full on final chorus. Maybe jack it up that semitone like we talked about earlier. To give the music that extra sense of lift. Those are important concepts and important ingredients that go into making a really good song. Another thing is a good story, a darn good story that people can relate to, or a set of lyrics that will pique their interest. They're either funny or they are catchy. They may be very repetitive, easy to sing, very repetitive, simple melody based out of a simple 4 or 5 note pattern. That does not have a complicated rhythm. So make your chorus very what we would call strident. So maybe whilst everything else is not necessarily all the accompaniment instruments are maybe not always necessarily on the beat, they're maybe syncopated, make your vocal right on the quarter note. And by doing that, you create this nice little contrast between the vocal being right strident on the beat and everything else that's away from the beat. You create contrast, and you're kind of, it's like nailing the lyrics to the listener's forehead. So you can hammer out your chorus like that and provide that little kind of that contrast between maybe a melody that kind of has quite an arc to it in the verses, but when you get to the chorus, it's got a narrow arc to it, maybe 3 or 4 notes rather than 5 or 6 notes in the verse. So there's little things like that all add up to making a good song, and it's how you put those things together that makes the difference between a really, really good song and a song that doesn't make it. And it can be, listeners are really fickle. It's like you were saying, that Cars song. It's a really, really great song, but it didn't get into the top 10, even though it's a good song. And sometimes really, really great songs, they don't get to the top 10, but people are singing them years and years later. Now, you can argue about which is more successful. The one that got to the top 10 was number one for 2-3 weeks and then dropped back down the charts down to out of the top 100, within 3 weeks. And then people forget about that song. It had a short-lived success, probably made an absolute fortune in that short-lived period, but then is forgotten about, and then people don't remember it anymore. Is that success? Or is that song that gets into the top 30, that gets into the top 20, that decades later people are still singing? And people are still buying that record. Maybe not in their millions, but they're still buying that record. Sales of that song are consistent over decades. Which would you say is more successful? Personally, I would go for that. I would go for the latter. Personally, I would much rather have a song that in 40 years' time people are still singing than a song that's forgotten about in 6 weeks' time, but still made me $1 billion. I would rather have my music still being sung in 40 years' time than I would a single song that makes $1 billion in 3 weeks. That's my personal preference. What's yours? How do you measure success? Do you measure success in terms of it gets to the top 10 or it gets to number 1 and then is forgotten about? Or is it one of those songs that decades later is still being sung? For example, Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. That song is over 40 years old. And even now, today, people are still singing it. It was, at the time of its release, very successful. And I think it even did get to number 1, and it held its position at the top of the charts for quite a long time. But even now, all these decades later, it may not be anywhere near the top 500. But people still sing it, and people still remember it, and people still remember the band. And so anytime, that comes up again in radio airplay, people go, oh yeah, Freddie Mercury, Queen, oh yeah. Queen is still kind of together, although Freddie's sadly departed, and he's no longer with us. But, the band is still kind of there. They're still kind of making music. They've had their Broadway show that's phenomenally successful. So I think maybe that's more success than having a song that gets to the top of the charts and then falls all the way back down again after a short period. But that's just my personal opinion. Bell Studios says, show me the money. Tony says, do you have a Steely Dan song that you think should have been a number 1? Did it have all the criteria you mentioned? There are a few songs actually of Steely Dan that did get into the top 10. And, they had platinum and certified double platinum records. The Asia album, which was released in 1977, was arguably not only just in terms of the quality of the music and the richness of the songwriting and the arrangements and everything else that make that record really, really successful. And again, that song is, over 40 years old. That record rather is over 40 years old, and it still is listened to and enjoyed to this day. I would say maybe songs like Ricky Don't Lose That Number. That's a song that has had a lot of FM airplay, still gets a lot of FM airplay. Or there's My Old School, which is a fantastic little song. But both of those, I would say, are more classically kind of pop songs in the Steely Dan canon than something like, the title track from Asia, or Babylon Sisters, or I Got the News, or something like that. Those are fantastic songs. They're really great. But they're not kind of the classical pop song. Whereas something like Ricky Don't Lose That Number has a lot more of those key ingredients that make a pop song, like a really, really catchy chorus. My Old School, again, has that really catchy chorus, well, I'm never going back to my old school. And then it's got some really, really great horn section things going on. And then you've got the really, really, really awesome guitar solo that is in the middle and then at the end of the song as well. So there's lots about those two songs in particular that I think did make them very, very successful. But at the same time as being certified double platinum, 50 years later, everybody is still singing those songs or listening to or downloading those songs. That to me is success. And the fact that, Steely Dan are still a band that are working to this day, that says a lot about, their longevity and their, and that to me is more success than having one hit that scores $1 billion and makes the songwriter incredibly rich, and they live off of that for the rest of their lives. Okay, you've made a lot of money. Congratulations. It is one measure of success. But as a songwriter, as a musician, I don't think it really should be the pinnacle. I think having a song that people listen to 50 years later, yeah, that you have achieved greatness if you have a song that people are still listening to 50 years later. That would be my opinion. Let's see. There's so much PR, says Sean White. There is so much PR that's used to intentionally muddy the waters of the topic of a good song. That is to some degree true, for sure. Dave says, success at the songwriting stage, to me, that the tune holds well, whether it hits the charts or not. Did not a rapper use a Steely Dan lick? Yes. Yes. There's Uptown Baby, which features a sample of the intro vamp to Black Cow from the Asia record. And it's literally just the first four measures of the intro to Black Cow. And then they used that as a springboard for the rap. And actually, I forget the name of the artist, the rapper, but he actually did it right. He had this great idea. He was, this great rap over the chord changes to Black Cow, and he was just going to go ahead and just put it out there and get the record out there. But he didn't. He actually made contact with Donald Fagen and Walter Becker and said, hey, I would like to do this with Black Cow. Now, Donald and Walter would never release any of their songs for use by other artists. It was just a carte blanche, blanket, no, not going to happen. And that's what they initially said to this rapper. But this rapper insisted, and he said, look, hear me out. Have a listen to what I'm going to do. So a meeting was set up, and Walter and Donald listened to what he did, and they actually kind of liked it. They kind of liked what he did, so they said, sure, you can use those 8 measures of Black Cow. And it actually became quite a fun thing. I mean, they did kind of threaten to sue at first. Donald and Walter did say, hey, if you put this out, we're going to sue you for copyright. But eventually that all kind of got worked out, and they agreed, hey, so long as you credit us and we have songwriting credit on this track of yours. And so he agreed. He said, absolutely, I will split the money with you, which is what they did. And so that particular song became a pretty big hit of its time. And, hey, I'm sure Donald and Walter were not going to knock having a bunch of extra money come in. Why not? But yeah, that did actually happen. Another marker of success, says Sean, is when others sample that song for their work or make other renditions. For example, Palavoy, that was most recently released by Mark Anthony. Yep, Uptown Funk. I think it might well have been Uptown Funk, Mike. I think you're right. Yes, Sean, sampling your work or having your work sampled by another artist. I think maybe, not always though. Depends on how they use your work. They might totally abuse your work and turn it into something that you personally wouldn't endorse. Or they might give your music a message that you wouldn't endorse. So you would have to think about that. It might be considered a success if, a mainstream song ends up in, gangster rap, for example. But you have to think about, is that going to do your credibility as the songwriter harm or good? And what about your integrity? What's the message that you're trying to convey as an artist? And how are they using your music to convey their message? In good conscience, could you endorse that message? And if you can't, don't give the rights away. Or rather, don't sell the rights, I should say. But that's a very, very good point. And it is the point upon which we shall end tonight's show. Thank you very much for your great, great questions. Dave's question about stacking notes and stacking chords and things is a very powerful device. I recommend you go and make use of it. Not just stacking notes, but stacking chords as well. You can stack chords on top of each other. You can stack, a C major chord, and you can put a B flat major chord over the top of it, or you can put an E major chord over the top of it. Sounds interesting. It's kind of like a major 7 sharp 5. But things like that, they work quite nicely. Go try those out. And then, of course, John's question about Neapolitan 6. Neapolitan 6 is very, very useful. Check out that Music Theory Academy link that I sent you if you want to learn a bit more about the Neapolitan 6 and also the tritone and tritonal substitution, because all of that is in this academy. There's loads of stuff here. There's music theory lessons, there's piano lessons, and there's piano sheet music. There's Christmas stuff, there's classic music, there's national anthems, there's nursery rhymes. If you want to take a nursery rhyme and abuse it, go for it. But if you just want to get access to it and learn it first and then abuse it, go ahead. That's all I'll say. Yes, Mike, we shall. We shall most certainly do that. But thank you, everybody, for being here. We have around about 20 people here, which is pretty good. So not bad at all. So thank you very much, everybody, for being here. I will see you again on Sunday night for Sunday Night Live. That is our Studio One Q&A show. So Studio One folks, get over here on Sunday, 6 p.m. Central, and you can ask your Studio One questions then, and we can tackle features, functionality, and any issues that you might be observing, and we can cover all of those. So I'll see you then, Sunday, 6 p.m. Central, back here. See you then. Have a great rest of your week. Cheers. Good night.